Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Write Books. I'm Mike Acrati, the head of writing at Butterdocs. I'm so glad you're here today. This is the very first episode of Let's Write Books, a weekly live stream show where writers can come together for community advice and, most importantly, like just a dedicated time for you to focus on writing your book, whether that's a new book or a work in progress, maybe something you've been working on for a while and you're kind of in the middle of it and you need a little boost. There's just so much going on in life. It's so hard to find time to write. And so this is a time where you can just kind of like block everything out and just focus on writing your novel. Or if you're writing something else besides a novel, that's cool too. But we're kind of mostly focused on novels. So I would love to know where you are, what are you writing, and is this your first novel? I have a feeling we're going to have a wide range of experiences here. So I want to know, have you written a bunch of books before? Are you an old pro? Or are you just kind of like setting out on on dangerous new seas? Yeah, great. So what is this? What is Let's Write Book? How is this Let's Write Books? How is this going to work? So each week we're going to do timed writing sprints. And during those writing sprints, it's kind of up to you what you want to do. If you already have something in progress and you just want to like get your words down and just like go for it, you can do that too. Or if you're editing or whatever it is, or if you're kind of starting out, we're also going to be doing kind of themed free writing prompts each week. So this week, the topic is starting your novel. So we're going to be doing some free writing about the topic of starting your novel. So you can join me in those free writing prompts, and those will kind of develop over time from starting a novel. Next week, we'll be talking about developing your characters, kind of different aspects. Well, then eventually we'll probably be doing more just kind of like drafting your novel sprints later on. So that'll be exciting. I want to encourage you to ask questions in the chat. And if you're an experienced writer, an experienced author, to also help answer them in the chat. We're also going to have guests along the way joining us for Let's Write Books. Not every week, but sometimes we will. And today we're going to have a special guest. Later on in the show, we are going to be joined by a very special guest, Charles Yu, the National Book Award winning author of Interior Chinatown, which is just like a fantastic novel. He also wrote the novel How to Live Safely in a Science Fiction Universe and a couple of collections of short stories and a lot of other stuff. He's a good friend of mine and an awesome dude, and I'm super excited to talk to him about what he thinks about when he's starting a new novel. So I'm kind of doing a little mini interview along our topic today of starting the novel. Again, that'll be later on in the show, probably after our second writing sprint he's going to join. If you have questions for him too, feel free to get those in the chat, and I can try to answer those for him. All right, so to answer these questions on the screen for myself, I am in Los Angeles. I am writing a novel from scratch, and I'm a professional screenwriter, and I published a short story, but I've never written a novel. So I come to you not as an expert in telling you exactly what to do in your novel. I come as an experienced writer, though, especially like in talking about story and character and some of these sort of universal writing things, but who's learning a new form. So I'm kind of excited to learn and grow and kind of go on this journey with y'all as we do it together. So I kind of think of this as a journey we're taking together, and I want it to feel like that. I want us to feel like we're all doing this together, and it's not just me telling you what to do. And also just kind of have all experience levels welcome here. So if you're a newbie, that's awesome. And if like you're an experienced novel, an old pro, I want you to feel like free to share your wisdom, your advice. If you see questions in the chat and you think you have a good answer to, like, do that. I want this to be a discussion, a community thing, not just like a one direction thing from me. And this show is brought to you by Butterdocs. That's a fantastic writing app, and it's what I'm going to be using to write my novel. I'll be doing some screen sharing along the way to kind of show my process and how the features work. And if you want to join me in writing in Butterdocs, there's a link and a discount code in the description below. Oh man, I want to check in with the chat. Loving to see everyone here. We got Tiffany from London, Teresa from Yorkshire, UK, Teji from San Jose. Tiffany's working on a graphic novel, her first one. Siko, howdy from Malaysia, although currently in Texas. Okay, you got me excited that we had someone in Malaysia. You got a newbie from Seaside. Teresa's written several manuscripts now, working on one that I plan to get published. Fantastic. Craig in St. Louis. This is my first novel. I'm currently just reading my first draft, making minor revisions where I find errors, but no major changes in the moment. Cash, writing a film. It's not a novel, but my first feature script. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of familiar names in the chat from our other writing show, Write With Us on Wednesdays, which is for focused on screenwriting. I'm excited you guys are here on this one as well. Jane, kind of like me, a screenwriter, but also completed a novel and just started a new one. Fantastic. Jesse, I have several bad first drafts written, but it's my first novel that feels somewhat solid. That's fantastic. And Juno in Massachusetts working on a memoir. Amy Lean has written tech documents and poetry for decades. This is my first fiction fantasy novel. I have pieces and no plot. Oh, well, hopefully we get some of that plot built today. This is great. I'm so you guys are yeah, so glad you're all here. Katie from Dallas, finally working a second draft of your Nano 2023 manuscript, hoping to have it queryable by end of year. Yeah, I did NaNoWriMo like a decade ago. And I got like 30,000 words in of like a YA novel, but I just kind of like didn't really love it at the end. And I kind of have a different approach, a different novel I'm working on now. Barry from Warsaw, working on a screenplay, but also looking to start a novel. Fantastic. Lola, welcome, writing your first novel, science fiction. Barbara, thank you for the support. I'm in LA starting my first novel and rather nervous about it. Barbara, I'm nervous too. Novels, especially as a screenwriter, novels have so many words. There's so many pages in them that it feels intimidating. And that's one of the reasons why Let's Write Books exists. I want it to kind of take a little bit of that fear factor away. And that, we're storytellers, we're writers. I think we can do this together. I think that's gonna be great. Eliza in Boston, starting first novel, several short stories, nonfiction book, and a screenplay under belt. I love this. A lot of people, like experienced writers, some in novels, some in different forms, maybe trying a new thing. And just the content scientists just stoked to get things going. That's fantastic. Awesome. All right. So I'm loving this. I'm loving the energy here. I think we're going to get into the first, let me just kind of like lay out the game plan for the prompts that we're going to do today. So I'm going to share my screen really quick here. Right. So yeah, this is my book that I'm going to be working. It's sort of about a high school reunion, a 20th high school reunion, which is about the age I am. So it's sort of topical. And this is Butterdocs. If you're unfamiliar, we have the built-in notes app, which is really cool, which is where I'm going to be doing my free writing here. So these are the 3 free writing prompts we're going to be doing for our 3 sprints today. And you're welcome to do these with me, or, if you don't want to, and you just want to do your own thing, that's also cool. So first, we're going to talk, or the first prompt is going to be, what am I excited about in this story? Is this a story world I want to invest a lot of time in? I think that's important to start with, because I feel like sometimes we can get too strategic in our thinking, like, oh, this feels marketable, or this feels like something, that I could sell, or something like that, where really, it needs to be a project that you are excited about. And like, what in particular are you excited about? So that's what we're going to do our first sprint on. Then we're going to do our second sprint about what is the story in my idea, kind of about the difference between what's a story and what's an idea. And then third, we're going to be doing the sprint on the topic of why is your protagonist the right character for this story? And why does it start at this point in their life? And we can talk a little bit more about those as we do it. Cool. All right. So I'm going to put 25 minutes on the clock and play some music. And we're going to get into this first free writing prompt, which is, what are you most excited about in this story? Is this a world you want to invest a lot of time and energy in? And again, I think this is a good place to start because, writing a novel is such a huge undertaking. I don't mean that in an intimidating way, but just that like, it's an investment in some ways of your time, of your energy, of your creative energy. And so really, it should be something that you're passionate about, like a story that you really feel like a desire to tell. So starting from your own enthusiasm as a writer, I think is a really good, a good place to build on. So that is going to be our prompt. I'm going to play some music here, put up a 25-minute timer, and then we're going to check in after the prompt and see how this goes, what we learned, what came out of that, take a little break before we move on. So I'm excited, y'all. Let's get into it. Hold on, play a little music, and let's do it. Let's write. All right. I feel like I could have just kept free writing on that prompt for like another full hour, but that is the end of the 25 minutes. How was that sprint for you guys? If you were doing the free write topic with me, did you come out of it more excited about your novel or less excited? And did you unlock any new ideas about your story or your characters? What kind of thoughts kind of arose from that free write? I'm curious. Get in the chat. That's one of the reasons I really love free writes, is the free part of it, where you start kind of with this prompt and then you just kind of start writing, and there's really like, it's like a low pressure way of exploring your story and your characters, right? Because you're not just trying to be like, okay, what happens next, and you like feel that pressure, which can be hard. Instead, you're just kind of like, your brain's free, and then you start making connections between things and you start going down rabbit trails. Yeah, so I want to know that. I also want, like, Charles Yu probably be joining about half an hour, so if you have questions again for Charles Yu about starting a novel, or novel writing in general, get those in the chat so I can ask him. So for me in this writing sprint, it was really cool. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I kind of want to, it's interesting for me to be doing this. I'm kind of thinking about like how open about my novel idea should I be? And I want to be kind of pretty open and talk about it a little bit. My idea basically centers around 3 estranged high school best friends who are coming back for their 20th high school reunion, not because they want to be there. They actually don't want to be there, but because of a secret from their past, which is kind of at risk of being revealed, and that could sort of destroy them. And so in my free write, there were a lot of things that kind of came up about friendship and nostalgia, and about like the sense of home and going home again, which are interesting. About the sense of place, and I realized it could sort of tie in. I'm kind of sending this in Central California, and I had worked at a newspaper briefly in Central California right after college, and I was thinking like, oh, how I could like tie into that. There's also a little bit of like a climate change aspect to it, and it was about that, and also some of the tonal stuff, and like, I don't want this to be just like a grim thing, and like how I can work humor into it. Yeah, and so I don't know. Yeah, I had a lot of fun in there, in the different ways I can kind of relate to this story. Here, to answer a couple questions, by the way. Seiko during that sprint asked, need the song to write to, what's its name? So this is that track that was playing was just one of the default tracks in this streaming platform we use called StreamYard, and it's called Daydreaming. But I don't know if it like exists anywhere outside of this place here. And Cash also said, do people still novelize movies, or has that stopped? I mean, that still happens. They'll do novelizations of movies, but I think what's way more common these days is that novels get turned into movies. If you're in the screenwriting industry, you'll see that constantly. And like, actually, that my idea started as an idea for a screenplay, but like even through this free write, I'm realizing how much better it is suited for a novel. There's also, I think my book's going to have multiple POVs, like 3 protagonists rotating through them. And so I'm sort of really excited to like explore the psychology of those different characters here. Neffy's really excited about creating a story or unexpected explanation about a real life artifact that popped up from 5,000 years ago, details about what was done for fabric before silk, flax, music tools, exciting. Oh, that sounds really cool. Kind of dwelling people's head. See, Amy Lang found where she needed more development. That's good. I mean, yeah, free writing is also great for like finding blind spots. Tiffany, it helped because I didn't realize how important certain themes were until I wrote them down. Oh, fantastic. Here. Cash was using D&D alignments, Dungeons and Dragons to characterize my characters, my pitch Bible. The whole Dungeons and Dragons thing's fascinating me. I've never really played. I tried once with some friends and it didn't go well. But I know that there's a lot of carryover between people, especially who like write fantasy and do Dungeons and Dragons. So that's kind of fantastic. Beth, help me see my second back as ever undernourished. Well, hopefully you can nourish it. Tone is huge. Yeah, no, that was so great. And I was kind of thinking in my free write about how many of the ways I'm going to explore tone. And so one of the things I mentioned is that there's kind of like a climate aspect in mine. And so I want it to be basically this area is undergoing drought and it's just gonna be very dry and dusty and just kind of like just this idea of dust kind of everywhere. And these clouds and this sort of sense of impending doom that really can like, or impending disaster could really help with the tone. Barbara's more excited about her idea after the prompt, clarified a lot and confirmed that outline is key. Great question. I had a lot to write and realized that I'll never get bored in this world. Yeah, that was really cool too. The more I was writing about mine, the more I was realizing like, oh, I think there's so many different ways I can come at this. And that's one of the reasons why I'm also excited to explore it as a novel instead of a screenplay, is that screenplays are very kind of limited in their focus in some manners, because it's just a manner of the form, right? Where you just don't have the space to explore certain things, the psychology of your characters. Everything has to be externalized. Everything kind of has to be a little more direct. And I think I'm really excited for my novel here. Lola, so good. How many O's in that? A 4, so good. Or a 4-0, so good. Working alongside others to help for me mentally contemplating my why while continuing working my draft. Help me to push past the tedium of my current scene. Yeah, I think that's really cool. The why in your connection to it. If you have a strong why as to like why you need to write this story, I think that's going to be so helpful in the long run here. Craig, now that I'm rereading what I wrote, I like finding parts I still like the second time around. I was afraid the vomit draft would be sad, but it's good segments. Cool. So yeah, so Craig, using the sprint a little differently for some of your rewriting, and yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of vomit drafts, and the idea of, or shitty first drafts, crappy first drafts, however you kind of think about it, getting things down on paper, especially in screenwriting. Honestly, in novels, I'm kind of curious to see how that translates as well, and whether I do that on the chapter level, on the second of the section level, or on the whole draft level, because a draft of a novel is obviously like a different animal compared to a draft of a screenplay. Teresa was saying, help me become clear about what I want the closing image to deliver. Also, I'd almost forgot my setting, the Scottish Highlands, which I love. So excited to get back into the world building. Yeah. And I think that's interesting obviously how setting can become a character in terms of the tone, obviously, but in terms of also just like how it impacts your character. Or your characters, right? How it impacts their psychology and how it impacts their actions. And the Scottish Highlands is so cool. That's like one of my dreams, is to go to the Scottish Highlands and just like wander the heath in like a big coat as like the cold wind blusters me. And maybe I'm walking to like a Scotch distillery in the distance or something, is one of the things. I also have this idea of like a stone cottage with a roaring fire where I'm writing. Like that's one of my writing fantasies in the Scottish Highlands. I love it. Great. This is awesome. We are off to a great start. I just want to say also next week, the focus is going to be on developing your characters. And look at that guy. Don't you want to come write with that guy? He looks very friendly and just like fun to write with. So next week, same time, 10 a.m. Pacific, we're going to be doing some writing sprints focused on developing your characters. And I think there's a RSVP link in the description below in the YouTube description. So you can check that out. I'd love to see y'all next week, and I'd love to see more people too. So feel free to spread the word among your writing friends, communities, online communities, real life communities, whatever they are. I would love it. His nephew was saying, I find it challenging that scenes and even music pop in my head so easily as I move forward my story, but explaining the characters thinking and feeling blow by blow takes so long. Yeah. Oh man. I mean, there are always going to be certain things that like come more easily to us and others that are more of a challenge. And like the psychology of the characters is obviously going to be one of the more complex aspects of your story. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Y'all. I'm glad we had a really good first sprint. I'm excited to jump into the second sprint. And hopefully by the time we're done with the second sprint, Charles, he goes by Charlie, will have joined us and we can chat about what he thinks about when he starts the novel. So if you joined in that and didn't hear that, Charles Yu will be joining probably after the next sprint. And he wrote Interior Chinatown, which won the National Book Award. He's just such a fantastic writer and a thoughtful guy and really great to talk to. Okay, so here we go. Something about the why here from Chantal. The why is so key for keeping my motivation burning, and being in the group is helping me stay focused. Makes me want to do a journaling session like this every time I sit down to work on my novel. Oh, that's fantastic. Chantal, so glad that the sprint was helpful for you. And so glad you're here, Chantal. Okay, so we're going to do the second sprint now, which is what is the story in my idea? Story equals character plus goal plus obstacle. And I think this is one of the key things, right? Where we have something we're excited about, an idea, and maybe it's like a setup or a character relationship or something. But there's kind of always the risk that there's not actually a story in there. And so I think, really one of the most basic ways to think of a story, if you just break it down to the nuts and bolts, is that story equals a character who wants something and they face an obstacle to get it. What they want can be a lot of different things. It can be an emotional goal, right? It can be a psychological thing. It can be something in their world. But you need that obstacle because that's where conflict comes from, right? So a goal plus obstacle equals conflict. So basically story equals character plus conflict. So for this free write, I want us to think about where the conflict is coming from in your story. What does your character want? Why do they want that? And what are the obstacles in their way as they go for that? And obviously this can depend. Like, so for my story, I have multiple protagonists. So I might have this sort of idea for all three of them and then have them come into conflict in certain manners, which is exciting to me. So we are going to now hit back up 25 minutes on the clock, a fresh writing sprint, and then we will chat on the other side. Again, if you want any questions for Charles, get them in the chat and we can get into those later when he joins us. And I'm going to play another track. Let's see how this one goes. This one's called Night Driving, which is like my vibe. I love when I write. So just love the name of this chat. Love the name of this track. And let's get into it. 25 minutes. Here we go. Damn, so deep in the sprint that I didn't notice that it had ended, which is I think that's what we're going for, is we all want to get lost in our writing sprints. All right, yeah, that was the second writing sprint on the story in your idea. How did that go for you guys? Let me know in the chat. Would love to hear again what was unlocked for you in that, what you struggled with, maybe maybe kind of some of the obstacles, conflicts that you experienced yourselves in that free write. For me, it was really fun. I mean, it's interesting because, like I mentioned, my my story has like 3 protagonists, so it's sort of kind of figuring out what each of them want, and like what the obstacles and not only sort of the story obstacles, but like how they come in conflict themselves and how they sort of shift, perhaps, in that like maybe 2 are in conflict with 1, but then it shifts and these 2 become in 1. And I really like the discussion that was going on in the chat here about character goals and how one. So it kind of started with a question here from Craig, about we say the character's a goal. How far into the novel does that goal become clear? Thinking end of Act 1, but correct me if I'm wrong. And I think I really liked the discussion in there. Teresa kind of starting off saying a lot of build up, and then you get to kind of the first plot point, and that kind of makes sense. And I think that kind of works. You can have that goal. But for me, it's interesting because like my story, they have a goal at the start, like before the novel even starts. That's kind of like the reason for the novel existing, is that which is sort of jumping into our third point right now, is a goal that already exists. But then like what their goals are shifts over time. And I think that's interesting, kind of what Beth was saying here. I like when characters have goals immediately, so I get invested, but by the end of Act 1, that goal turns inside out to reveal, there's a more important goal for them. And I think that's really cool and like really important. In screenwriting a lot, I talk about internal goals and external goals. The external goal is the thing they want in the world, and the internal goal is sort of the why, right? So the external goal is what they want, and the internal goal is why do they want it, and that oftentimes in a story, you're using the external goal as an excuse almost to get the character to deal with their internal goal. And so I think that kind of ties in a little bit here to what Beth was saying about there being, a more important goal for them to discover. When then Teresa was saying, yeah, I can see that now. Meeting goals otherwise be very 2-dimensional. Yeah, I think that's really cool. Is that like, the characters aren't static. It's not like there's just like one thing that they're doing. What they want, how they're doing it, everything like that can change over time. Next for that sprint, characters, gold, obstacles, conflicts going well, slowly but well. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a marathon, not a sprint, but that's awesome. Amy Lane here was saying, I'm thinking too vastly and having trouble getting important details worked out. I would say that, like, particularly for free writing in this, like, not to worry too much about that. I think that's part of, for me, the idea of free writing is it kind of stays, or it starts kind of broad, and then things kind of emerge like little raindrops, if you will, of the cloud. Sorry, it's like coming Los Angeles where we desperately need rain. I'm like thinking in terms of a rain metaphor, that like for this free writing, you have this large cloud that's sort of looming above things, but then you kind of eventually get some of these drops that come from it that you can expand, which is kind of what I was thinking, like going with, you're right, where it was starting just kind of very broad, but then like I got a couple of like very concrete character details out of it, like a manifestation. I was thinking about this idea of like a character who's dealing with this secret, this thing, having like some sort of physical manifestation of that, in their body, which I think is always cool. Tiffany had no idea that so much of what she's writing is about babies. That's exciting. That's cool. Now I'm curious as to like what exactly it is and where do the babies fit in. Cash is working on learning about my characters this week, so hopefully I can flesh them out next week. Oh, awesome. Yeah. So again, next week we're going to be focusing on character development. If you want to RSVP for next week, you can get that. Will be in the chat. the link to RSVP will be there. Katie was saying, really enjoyed that exercise. I think it's super valuable, but also definitely struggle to narrow down what I feel are very complex motivations and machinations into something simple. I think that kind of ties in a little bit to like what Amy Lane was saying about thinking vastly. Yeah, and you may not, get to that. That's kind of that is a challenge to take those complex motivations into something simple. I think it really can be helpful to figure out like a concrete thing, that they want. I always find in my writing, like having a concrete thing to sort of build the abstract thing around is always very helpful. Katie's saying, I think it's going to be important for me to keep coming back to the exercise for all the characters throughout the writing process. Yeah, awesome. Nephew saying, have 3 characters with the same goal, 2 hatch a secret plan, but must invite a volatile 4th character, execute the plan, which complicates things due to his emotional investment. Oh, that sounds fun. I love complications ensuing. Yeah, again, that's kind of what I was talking about. Like I have multiple protagonists in my story, and I kind of realized sort of, one that was actually helpful in that exercise, I think, as I realized who the main POV character was. Like I have 3 POV characters, and I wanted to do rotating, chapters, like chapters from each POV. But like in my story, there's sort of like characters that are sort of on opposite poles, and then there's like a center character who sort of starts more aligned in goals with one character, but drifts more towards the other character, and sort of that being the character that I identify with the most, which I think is important, and like whose story I'm most interesting to tell. So I think it'll be interesting for me as I move forward towards like outlining and drafting later in the process to kind of see like how I explore that formally. Like, are there chapters just longer? Is there a different thing in POV, in sort of like third person versus first person? I don't know. I'm kind of excited to explore that. Like, this is very fun for me as someone who usually writes scripts to kind of have all these new tools. Barbara, another useful prompt. Yes, much more came up for me than expected. Awesome. Well, I was the obstacle this time around, very distracted, but some progress. Look, it's not all going to be wins, right? It's not all W's all the time, but glad you made some progress. Psychologically, I wonder if our characters might all be various aspects of ourselves. I think that's always fun. Is I like to think sometimes of my characters as like if I broke myself down into different pieces, taking a raw little thing and then like building from that. Like if I take, a weakness of mine, or something I don't like about myself, or something I do like about myself, or something I wish I was more of, or something like that. And then like using that almost as a seed to like build something more complex that then becomes not me. Because I don't think that like our characters should all just be like avatars for ourselves and manifestations of ourselves. But I do think that like it can be very helpful to use ourselves as a starting point and our own emotions and feelings about things here. Just checking in, Charlie, he was doing something else that kind of was going over. He should be joining us pretty shortly. So again, we're going to do one more writing prompt. If you joined us in there, kind of like run through what we did so far. Our first writing prompt was, what are you most excited about in this story? Is this a world you want to invest a lot of time and energy in? And then our second free writing prompt is, what is the story in your idea? And that's kind of what we've been talking about, like character goals and obstacles. And then in our third and final prompt, we're going to be talking about, why is your protagonist the right character for this story? Why does it start at this point in their life? And I think that one is very helpful in terms of just like, where do you start the story? Which is something that is always a challenge in terms of like, if you have the whole spectrum of your character's life, at what moment does this specific story start? And that has to do with kind of like with what things are going forward. Chantal was saying, I love clocking an interesting gesture from someone else and expanding it into a personality character. Yeah, I think that's one of those great things about like how we can take things from our our own lives from ourselves, but also just things that we see out in the world. Before I had a smartphone, like I used to carry around just like a little notebook in my back pocket and a pen, and eventually it just became like molded to my butt cheek and like old and battered and stuff. But I loved just having that thing. And it was one of those things where like if I was hanging out with my family or something and like I pulled out the notebook to write something down, everyone got very self-conscious because they're like, oh great, are we going to end up like in one of Micah's scripts because we just did something? Like what did we just do? Yeah. And I think that can be really fun. All right. So one thing I want to mention also is like, this is my free writing here. Again, I mentioned I want to be like open kind of in what we're doing here. That one of the really cool things about writing this in ButterDocs is that, the notes live side by side with your novel. So like, this is actually where my novel will be. This is my outline I'm going to be building. And like, I'll be able to have this, information, all my free writing available as I'm writing. And also like, if there's something in here that I like, I can like highlight it and then like turn that into a new note that like links to this note. So you can sort of like build your writing in there, which is pretty cool. All right. So I think since Charlie's been delayed, we're just going to like hop into the next writing sprint, which if he joins pretty soon into it, I might interrupt just because like I really want to hear what he has to say. So again, and if you have to leave, this is going to be recorded. It's on YouTube. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to miss, what Charlie has to say, it'll be on YouTube. So you'll be able to like go back to the same link, the same video, and like and see what he has to say. But I think we are going to jump into the third writing sprint again, which is this prompt is, why is your protagonist the right character for this story? Why does it start at this point in their life? And that is just to say, like, feel free to draw on the things that you learned from your first two free writing prompts. Also, if you felt like you wanted to keep going down one of the rabbit holes from your earlier free writing prompts, then please, feel free to do it. These prompts are just, they're just guidelines. Also, if you have to head off, that's fine. This is kind of a come when you can, leave when you need to sort of event. But I would love to see a farewell in the chat and let me know how the writing went today. And then again, I hope to see you next week where we're going to be focusing more on developing our characters, and you can RSVP for that in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to play some music here. We're going to do the writing sprint. And again, just like fair warning, I might interrupt this writing sprint if Charlie joins in so we can get the benefit of his wisdom. So, all right, here we do it. 25 minutes on the clock. All right, everyone. I said we were going to interrupt if he joined very soon, and he has just joined. So I am going to bring to the stage Charles Yu. So please, without further ado, help me welcome Charlie.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Wait, is
Hey,
that real?
Yeah, no, that was just everyone across the internet chiming in with their enthusiasm, and wasn't definitely a little soundbite that I played. That I play on.
I'm sorry for being late with technical difficulties on the podcast before and on my end. And anyway, I apologize.
No worries, man. So glad that you made the time. Yeah, so we've been doing some writing sprints this morning. We did 2 so far. The first one was kind of about why we're excited about the stories that we're writing, and is it a world that we want to invest our time in? And then we kind of did a second one about the story and the idea. What are kind of the goals and the obstacles creating conflict in it? And kind of is there a story in there that's not just like an idea or a premise, something that maybe has the legs to turn into a novel? And then the third one we're going to do, which we had just kind of started and we'll hop back into after we chat with you, is why is our protagonist or protagonists, if it's a multi-protagonist story, why are they the right character for the story, and why does it start at this point in their lives? But first off, I just want to say, guys, if you guys don't know Charles, he is the National Book Award winning author of Interior Chinatown. He also wrote the novel How to Live Safely in a Science Fiction Universe, and he has 2 collections of fantastic short stories. He's also a screenwriter, which is how we know each other. We work together on the show Lodge 49. And Charles is just like a great person to talk to, I think, on this subject. So, Charlie, I kind of wanted to start by like asking you, if you have an idea that you like, how do you determine whether there's an actual novel in the idea?
Yeah, that's such a hard question. I would preface by saying, every idea is different and every writer is different, and you could easily be, I've been wrong, where
Yeah.
So already discount what I'm going to say by a lot.
How long have you gotten into projects before like realizing that you were wrong?
Oof, that's a good question. I think somewhere between like 50 and 60 pages is where I've gotten where I realized I sort of petered out. And Interior Chinatown for a long time was about 80 to 90 pages of mostly the parents' backstory, which ends up being later in the book. But for a long time, I thought maybe this is a novella, or I didn't know a frame to put around the novel, and to find, I think, as you hinted at in one of your prompts, like to find the story actually, instead of to me, I often come at things from a perspective that isn't story first, and I always have to get back to story. But yeah, to answer your question, I feel like the way to know is 2 things: that there's a kind of is there enough stuff here? Is there enough meat on the bone, I guess? And that is not necessarily about plot or world or any one specific thing. To me, it's more like, do I feel like I can't stop the proliferation of ideas versus, like you almost should be cutting away too much in my head rather than trying to fill in a world. Whereas with a short story, same, you might want to be cutting away as much as possible. But I think that once the thing starts to curl around itself, it feels like a moment or an incident, then that's not going to be a novel, right? But with a novel, I feel like every time I go into a novel idea, I'm usually generating too much, and I'm spinning off into 2 ideas, into like sort of avenues that I need to come back from.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can I ask, like, formally, like, is that happening in your head as you stare at a wall? Are you like walking your neighborhood? Are you free writing or journaling? How do you actually get those kind of thoughts going and those ideas?
All of the above. I think I stare at a blank screen. I start typing. I then will, or I'm writing in a journal as well, or I'm writing on whatever's at hand. And then once I'm really deep in something, it's taking walks. It's a well-timed shower, You know, it's like, when can I find that moment where if I'm really stuck, um, you know, sometimes like running an errand, it's like the transitory moments where your subconscious is finally going to sneak something past the sensors, you know, and be
Mm.
like, here's actually what you're missing. But yeah, I feel like you sort of need both. You need the banging your head against the wall, kind of like go at it, and then the let yourself breathe. And then usually, for me anyway, that's when there's a kind of breakthrough.
I love that, like sneaking it past the censor thing. That's one of the reasons why I love free writing. And like my free writing is so weird. Like I talk to myself on the page. Like I'm like, okay, so what are we doing? What, like I talk to myself in the third person, and it just feels like if I do it in that way, so it's like I'm not actually trying to figure out story beats or anything like that. I'm just sort of like going over it, and that there's like permission for the ideas to sneak through, you know, in that format without the pressure of like trying to actually solve, you know, the problem directly.
You strike me though. I mean, I've read enough of your writing that I feel like and tell me if this is wrong.
Mm,
That to me, you don't seem like someone who gets writers. Like I feel like I'm not only blocked, I'm also just a
mm.
very kind of slow producer of things. But you strike me as someone who's quite able to generate, or you don't suffer for lack of like energy or writing. Is that fair?
You know, it's interesting. I feel like oftentimes that is the case, but like sometimes it ties into emotional things. So like there's a script, a screenplay I'm writing for a movie right now, and like I was working on it, and then I just really wanted to be done with it, and I sent it to my manager, and I was like, I'm ready to be done with this, and he said something like, "No, this is a good early draft," and I'm
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
"Early draft," like, and it just like, and it hit, and like I put the script in a drawer for like 3 months because I just felt sick when I opened it. So like I think there certainly are times where like I feel I face that. But I feel like oftentimes that's more like less about the story and the character itself and more like my feelings that I'm bringing towards it about like wanting to be done with it or something like that, or wanting to move on. Yeah. So you said there was two things, right? One was that having enough ideas that it feels like they're proliferating. What's the second thing?
The second thing is, to me, like a real emotional attachment to the thing. You
Mm,
know, I think that's the thing that often I forget about on a day to day basis, or in a bigger picture of like, if I get deep into something, and this happens more, I would say, with TV and film stuff than it does with prose, but it certainly still happens where it's like I'm like so focused on some mechanical or technical thing where like, how do I bridge these two chapters? They feel like they need something, and I'm not like, and I'm approaching it like from a sort of, you know, craft or almost like a
mm,
engineering perspective, like as if the problem were sort of, you know, just abstract, when really it's like, well, one, anything is possible. You know, like there's no rule, so just bridge it in the way that you want to bridge it. And then two, the thing that flows out of that is like, well, how do I know the best way to decide that? And to me it goes back to, yeah, what's the burning thing inside that makes me
mm,
have to tell this story? And it's usually something really personal or emotional, or, you know, some, I don't know. So, yeah, what's the central impulse that's driving? Like, what's the, if there's a question or if there's a conflict, or what is it? And just like going back to that, because to me that's where it starts and ends. Is like a kind of novel to me feels more like you're asking yourself an open-ended question, and then you're working out how you want to work that out for however long you
mm.
want to work it out. But you're not going to, to me, you're not going to answer that question. A short story, I don't, I mean, I guess it could start that way as well, but to me, short stories just feel much more, um, um, yeah, less about sort of that kind of desire to like ask a really big question, you know, and then just see what happens with that. You know, I don't
Yeah.
leave that
No,
aside.
it always feels like, you know, a short story is more like about a moment almost, right? A that you can build around versus like an something ongoing, a journey kind of, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, one thing you said in there I think is really important, and that is like when you're trying to figure out like the right thing to do to like bridge those problems, because I feel like that is oftentimes, especially like newer, younger, or writers, you know, who are getting started, face that because they want to do it the right way, right? Like I see this a lot. People are like asking the answer to something, like, how do I do this the right way? And like maybe they haven't developed that muscle yet of sort of like trusting their gut in some sense. Like, how do I don't know. I don't know if this is a hard question, maybe, but like, how do they know? How do they know what they think almost? Or like, how do they find that sort of like light inside of them that's sort of guiding them, be like, hey, trust yourself, you know, go in that direction.
Right. Yeah, failure, I think is you know, I think you got to do it. Practice failure. To me, it's like it's a chicken egg thing, because if the to me the central skill in, like, for me anyway, for writing was, can I make this better, right? Can I make it even, you know, 1%, or really more realistically a fraction of a percent better every time I touch it. Sometimes I make it worse, but if over the long term I'm making it a little bit better and I can recognize when I'm making it better, that's really all you need, because then you can iterate long enough that it's going to result in the work you want it to be. And you're right, Mike. I feel like there's no to me that's like, it's like, well, like if you're shooting baskets, you know if it went in or not. But you know, I mean, some of it is having external feedback, but I think that's dangerous, right? I think if you're sent, to me anyway, your central audience, or your key audience, you're relying on specific people or a person even. I mean, it can be super valuable to have a group or an editor or somebody, a trusted, you know, collaborator who can read and tell you. But you know, it's so if it's a purely internal compass and it's somewhat subjective, if not completely subjective, like how could you possibly know? And
Yeah.
um I feel like it's honesty, you know, it's reading it aloud, you know, do you yes, I often open what I'm working on and hate it and hate myself and close it immediately, or immediately go on the internet and want to avoid it. But I return to it if I know that it's still getting better. And I feel like that's ultimately what it is. If, like, I can't stay away from working on it, I'm probably, you know, there's something there, and I'm you know, it matters to me enough. And over time, I do think you sort of have to just build up that sense of, is this closer to what I think? You know, like, and yeah, I guess I really didn't answer the question, because I don't know that there's an easy answer to that question.
No, I think you did. I mean, I think, like, you know, there's a question from Ayune. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but failure is such a great teacher. And I feel like it is also a thing where, like, you have to be kind of comfortable with failure, and like, or at least like risking it, right? Like it becoming comfortable with that risk of going down these avenues, and like kind of seeing what happens at the end of them. And if it is a failure, if you do get to page 50 or 60, you know, sort of like building up the resilience to then try again, you know, if there is another answer there. But in terms of like that compass thing we were talking about, there's a question here from Nephew, and she says, what happens when you're emotionally invested in your story, as you should be, and the powers that be make you change your baby in order to get to market? How do you cope? And I think there's another way of also looking at this question in terms of like, when you have that personal compass and you're trusting it, like you think this is the right way, but obviously you want it to be published, you want it to come to life, you want commercial success. How do you kind of reconcile those two, perhaps, you know, contrasting forces?
Oof. I mean, that's a hard question. I won't pretend that I've never made changes based on external. I have an editor, I have an agent, and they're both really great readers. They're better readers than I am. They suggest changes all the time. I have to trust them that they're not doing it in a way that is untrue to the impulse or to the story, and that they're not doing it for some cynic. And I do trust them. But if somebody were to explicitly say, hey, this would be more marketable for me, I I think I would have a hard time continuing to work on that unless I felt like it was actually making the story better, or I could incorporate that in a way that, you know, it would still be true of, like it still would work. I don't know that I could, like, someone go, no, how about, instead of dragons, it's robots. You know what I mean? I just don't know if I could exactly do that. I feel like, you know, everyone has to make their own choices, but for at least for my prose writing, TV and film is a wholly different beast that I don't want to go into right now. But like
Mhm.
my prose writing, I feel like that's very much, if it doesn't work for me, then I think I actually wouldn't do it. So
Yeah, it is interesting wherein sometimes I feel like I'm incapable of doing it. Like
yeah,
like it's just what is that? I don't know what that thing is. Like writing's very hard. And like, if it's a thing I'm not interested in, then like how do you get yourself to put in the amount of time and energy like it would take to write that thing? Like it almost seems like an impossible task.
it's really a good point. I literally think it would be hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that said, if somebody isn't phrasing it that way, but you felt like that's what they're doing, to me that's a more tricky that's a trickier thing to navigate. If you feel like, are you hitting on something? It's the whole note behind the note thing. It's like I always try to take every note at least at face value, as to the reader of this is sincere and intelligent and touching on something that isn't quite working for them as a reader of this.
Mhm.
So that must tell me something. And so that's one way to interface with it, is to say, I hear what you're saying and I'm looking at the story, and I'm not going to change them into robots, but I think maybe what you're saying is, you know, something that I could
Yeah.
look
And to expand on that, if you're not familiar with the phrase, the note behind the note, oftentimes someone will give you a note on something because there is some issue there, but they might not be able to put their finger on it, identify it, or give you a solution to it. But the fact that they felt the need to give you a note kind of can sometimes indicate there's something there. There's some issue there that the reader doesn't really know what it is or how to solve it. And maybe they give you a bad suggestion or something else. But that if you look at it as the writer, you might be able to find the note behind the note, the thing behind the problem that was, motivating them to give you this note, even if the note itself was misguided. And I think I really believe in that oftentimes getting bad notes can be helpful if you sort of look at the underlying things. Charlie, you mentioned that you don't really start with plot kind of when you're building your story. What are you starting with? Is it a character, a problem, a relationship? What kind of is the nugget or the platform that you kind of start to build off of?
Yeah, for me, the most interesting is an idea, and I think that's like a central kind of question, or that I then have to sort of figure out how to build that into somebody's, life or a relationship. But the problem with that for me is, it's hard to spin out something much longer than a short story just from a pure premise, right? From a what if this, or it's not so much a what if for me. It's like the idea that work has dehumanized us, and it's as if we don't really even we it's like I wrote this short story where you could outsource parts of your life to people who live in India, and like that came from an initial impulse of me working as a lawyer and feeling like I was selling my time, and then imagining sort of, me also knowing that, like, I have a very privileged existence and wanting to imagine a sort of much more difficult version of that. But that's a short story that ends up being 7,000 words. I don't know that I had a novel in me about that, because I think it comes centrally out of a premise, right? So for me, like a novel, it has to just feel like there isn't necessarily, um, Yeah, I think it just comes from like a central question that I'm just grappling with, like how is this person going to get over the death of the person they love most on earth? You know, how is this person like, I'm just dealing with something so big that I'm not going to answer it or close it. There's a lack of closure about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you were talking, you might have heard me typing because I thought maybe of what the central question is for my novel, and it popped in my mind. Like, I need to get that down. So I think that's so great to think about. Like, what is this big idea that you're exploring, and that like it shouldn't be an easy question, right? Like it shouldn't. You probably have no idea how to answer it, and you may never know how to answer it, even at the end of the novel. But you've explored it like in some interesting way. At least. So in terms of that, is that how you approach theme sort of like, is theme a distinct thing for you from the central sort of question? Or is that, so I think that theme is something people really struggle with. It feels like very big and abstract and philosophical in a way that's almost outside of your writing. Is that how you kind of think of theme, or is that explored in a different way?
I don't think of theme. That's a really good question. I don't think that, for me anyway, I think of theme as something that you can engineer or inject. You know, I think of it as an emergent property of the story you're telling that arises out of, if someone's going to find theme as a reader, that's kind of on that end of it. You know what I mean? But to me, it comes out of whatever the work is for somebody to extract in that way, if that makes sense. Because yeah, so I more approach it of, I find an area or a situation or a way into this big question, right? Into the world that I want to set up. And then I
Gotcha.
want to write sentences.
Sorry, I think it might be my internet that is bad, or yours, but kind of.
Is it still? Did we break the internet? Should I leave and come back? Hello.
All right. Is this? Yeah. Sorry. Are you back now, Charlie? I think maybe we've.
Okay. Am I back?
Yeah. Yeah. It's on my side, Charlie. You're fine. I'm freezing up. So I think everyone but me heard what you were saying. So I can go back and rewatch that to get your thoughts on theme.
It wasn't don't worry.
I'm sure it was great. It sounded brilliant. The little bits that I heard. One of the questions I wanted was, how quickly do you jump into the actual drafting of your story? Are you doing a ton of outlining first, ton of free writing, or are you sort of actually chapter one in there writing scenes pretty quickly?
No, I'm pretty slow about it. I think I try to sneak up on the novel. I'm like gathering leaves and, things. And until the point where it's sort of ridiculous and I've taken way too long. And then I'm like, okay, got to write something. But I do. Yeah. I'm not someone who jumps in immediately.
Nisi had another question she had asked earlier. How was it transitioning from writing the novel to becoming the showrunner for the series? Was the intention always to adapt it for, this is for Interior Chinatown, which is now an amazing show on Hulu that you can watch. So yeah, Charlie, what was that like transitioning from writing the novel to the showrunner? And did you write the novel with the intention of adapting it into a show?
I didn't intend to adapt it. I didn't think of that. I was just trying to finish the book because I've been working on it for a long time. It was a lot of fun. It was really difficult. I won't lie. Like personally, creatively, it was really challenging to do. It's just a lot of work, and I'm not complaining, but it's just a whole different thing to make a whole show. But it was, the big thing was learning how to work in a totally different medium. Like I'd written for shows, as Micah said, like we met on a TV show. But when you're actually making something and trying to tell a story visually rather than through language, it's a very different skill set.
Yeah, I mean, it's a managerial capacity, in ways, and you're working with all these different things versus you just sitting. What is it? Do you? I think it's always fascinating. Do you have an office that you write in generally? Do you write in coffee shops? What's kind of your ideal writing environment?
I wrote up until very recently, up until 2 years ago, I wrote in like coffee shops or just in a corner of my house, sometimes my car, the garage, if I needed, in a closet or in the garage, if I just needed real quiet. Now I have a little bit of a home office, which I'm sitting in. So it's very messy. Otherwise I'd show you, but it's nice to have a space, but it's also very close to the kitchen. So that's not great. I'm just
too much snacking. Yeah. Nisi had another question I think is really cool. Do you write in order or whatever pops up at that moment?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I tend to try to write in order when I'm further along in a project, right? Like, because I need the flow to understand what I'm doing. But early on, I guess over the years, I've learned that if something is hitting me and I'm like, I don't know where that goes or that's at the end, I've learned to just seize on that because it may not come back in the same way.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily always just like make a note and put a placeholder and go, I'll come back to that, because you might lose some of it. So
awesome. Well, Charlie, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and apologies for my internet being the problem there and me blaming you, which is just such a cruel thing to do. But everyone, I want to thank you for, and people who ask questions, thank you so much. And I just really appreciate it, man. And best of luck with your writing moving forward. So everyone, if you want to say farewell to Charlie before he leaves us, we're going to do one more writing sprint. But yes, in the chat, we can say our farewells. But Charlie, thank you so much, man. Look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yeah, thanks. Good luck, everyone, on your writing.
Awesome.
See you.
Great. All right, cool. So we're like, man, we've been going for a while. So I think I'm just going to do a short little sprint here, everyone. If you have to head out, totally. But if not, we can finish this last sprint. I'm going to play some music. And if you stick around to the very end, everyone, we can say our farewells. But going to get this going, and I'll catch you guys for a final farewell at the end. All right, everyone. That is the end of our final sprint and the end of our inaugural very first Let's Write Books. Thank you so much for coming here and everyone who's stuck it out to the end. So glad that you were here. I hope you will join us next week where we're going to be talking about developing your characters, doing more free writes, or you can work on your novel. Same time, same place. You can also RSVP at the link in the chat. Again, we're using ButterDocs. There's a discount code in there if you want to check out ButterDocs. That's what I'm using to write my novel and to free write and do all the notes and everything in there. It's fantastic. Yeah, so until next week. Also, if you write screenplays, you can join us on Wednesday for our other show called Write With Us, which I think eventually is going to be called Let's Write Scripts. So this will be Let's Write Books, and that one's Let's Write Scripts. And you can RSVP for that at arcstudiopro.com/events, arcstudiopro.com/events. So I'll see some of you on Wednesday, and hopefully all of you and even more of you next Monday. Until then, everyone, be kind to yourselves, and happy writing. Catch you later.